Welcome to The Thriving Marriage, the podcast for those who want to get their spouse back in love with them and truly thrive.
You'll learn why 95% of people don't save their marriage and the secret method no one else is talking about that will change everything for you. Are you ready? Let's turn tragedy to triumph.
Here are your hosts, international marriage experts, Mark Johnston and Heather Choate.
Now we're live.
Welcome everyone here to The Thriving Marriage. My name is Heather Choate and I'm here with Mark Johnston. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing wonderful today. How are you doing, Heather?
Doing really good. It's a beautiful, beautiful summer day and I'm just loving it. So today, Mark and I are going to talk about a requested topic from you guys of how to cope with the teeter-totter effect. Now, if you're not sure what the teeter-totter effect is, it's kind of that situation where your spouse seems warm 1 minute, cold the next. And if you're going through that, then this podcast is definitely going to be for you. We're going to cover why the teeter-totter effect is actually what we consider here a huge milestone in relationship restoration. It's part of the path process, and it actually means you've made a lot of progress. And how to handle, though, the emotional roller coaster that accompanies when your spouse is warm and then cold, kind of that flip-flop, right? And then 4 steps to overcome their last bit of resistance so that they want to be with you for good. Before we get to that, we're going to do our client win of the week. Mark, you want to take the client win of the week this week?
Sure. This one comes from Alicia with permission to share. Alicia is saying that she would really suggest calls with myself. He has a way with people. She says, my husband never liked therapy before, and 4 sessions with Mark has made a world of difference. I'm going to point out, just like Alicia said, I do remember her husband was really resistant to talking with anyone, and it shifted to the point where he was wondering if he could have, some of his own sessions with my just individually with me to take care of some issues. It's just what I would hear from these sort of situations, and I hear this a lot, is I come in to sessions like this and the counselor, the coach sides with one person. They don't listen to me. They don't understand what's going on, or they judge me. And especially with situations, with relationships where it can be very personal, like there might be addictions or infidelity or other really negative things going on. Not to toot my own horn, but I pride myself in being able to approach what could be considered really big mistakes with a lot of care, understanding, and compassion. A lot of what we teach our own clients. And I think this is, it's what makes this sort of comment possible. But, I'm glad Alicia and her husband made a lot of progress. She did start off on her own. And through some of our teachings, she was able to get her husband on board, and they're doing much better now. So glad to hear that comment from Alicia.
Yep, I've been, Alicia, shared with me that we could share this, and I've been, messaging her for months now, and kind of watched her journey, and it's incredible to see. We always encourage our clients to start on their own, especially because most of the time, as the spouse is leaving, then pressuring them to work on the marriage, right, is only going to push them further away, as we share here in the podcast many, many times. And so starting on your own and having kind of that courage to do so and trusting the process and seeing now her husband's even working on the sessions and is gotten to that point in the path process. So it's awesome. So Mark, let's describe what the teeter-totter effect is. This was requested to us by you guys because you've been listening to our master classes. You've been listening maybe here at the Thriving Marriage podcast. And I'm not sure who coined the term. I don't know if it was you or I, or we picked it up, but the teeter-totter effect. And it's a really challenging thing for a lot of clients to go through. However, we see it as a huge win. So why is that? Why do we see it actually as a sign of of progress here.
You mentioned here, like, you're not sure where the term came from, and I'm trying to think back to that as well. We do a lot of reading, a lot of research to come up with our material, and I'm trying to think, did I pick that up from anywhere in particular, or is that just, essentially it really describes the situation. You think of a teeter-totter on a playground, and it's kind of this up and down sort of thing going on. It's just like in a relationship. It's where a husband or wife will be drawn into the relationship. They enjoy spending time with their spouse. They might be quite warm or friendly or flirtatious, and then some time happens, or even quite suddenly they'll turn cold and they'll suddenly exit, or they'll turn angry and argumentative. And our clients come to us and they're really confused. Like, I don't get it. Like, a client might say, my husband is so flirtatious and wanting to be with me and really like confident and happy around me. And then the next day he was saying, okay, we need to push this divorce forward. Why aren't you getting this in? Why do you always have to be like this, and very negative and critical? And it can be very confusing to have that huge switch. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was this being a good thing. And certainly that might be odd, but certainly if you didn't see that teetering, I don't know how would we teeter-tottering, whatever we want the verb version of this term. Certainly if you weren't seeing that before, and then you start seeing some of those positive shifts, even if it's briefly, that's certainly a good sign that things are going a bit better.
Yeah. So where does this teeter-totter effect happen kind of in the timeline of the PATH method? Because we know it's like a step-by-step method. If you're new to the podcast and you're not familiar with the PATH method, I encourage you to go back and listen to those episodes. But maybe just real quickly, like, kind of give a breakdown of where this happens in the timeline there.
No, that's a good question, and it really depends on where you are starting, and what I would say is it's probably it can pop in different spots, but it's going to pop in these transition periods where there needs to be a little bit more commitment or consideration for the relationship to move forward. So for instance, if you and your spouse are hardly talking and things like that, and you start making some changes, you start being kinder, listening a bit more, and there has to be some shift. Do I, where your spouse starts asking, do I engage with my husband or wife? More often, I'll hear it further along, where you're at this kind of point where there needs to be actual commitment to the relationship, where they say, do I consider coming back? Do I want to be with my spouse? Have they made enough changes? And the teetering comes from that, where they start asking these questions, they start looking for some criteria to make that decision. And so it's always in these transition periods where this teetering comes into effect, because they're trying to kind of weigh their decision and make that judgment.
Yeah. So teetering is an indication of progress, especially if you've been in a situation where your spouse is like wanting a divorce, closed off, right? Because now they're starting to consider in their mind the possibility of being happy with you, but they're still holding on to some elements of their story. So let's go to that a little bit. So how is it an indication that there actually is some attraction? They're being somewhat attracted back to you again.
Well, I mean, it's obvious as they exhibit some actions that are, like we were talking about earlier, when there is that flirtation, when there is that extra measure of kindness or the extra measure of comfort. A lot of our clients, when they come to us, they might say, we can't be in the same room together. And then they start talking about this teetering effect when, they say, I don't get it. My husband is coming by the house now, just randomly because they just want to talk, or they start lingering, around the house just to chat a little bit longer. It, like Heather was saying, like you were saying, Heather, it's because they're noticing some changes, and there are some things that are attracting them. Perhaps it's because you are demonstrating that extra measure of care, or perhaps they might say that they are just physically attracted, but almost always that physical attraction is backed up because there have been more relationship changes or emotional changes. Perhaps it's just because the tension has dropped and there's not so many arguments. There isn't this kind of sense that I need to be right, or I need to, I need to be on guard. So, to break it down, we either have a drop in tension, or, conversely, an increase in comfort, or some of the basic emotional needs start being met, or they are starting to describe you more positively. Their story has shifted to say that here are some good things about my spouse, and that's where that physical attraction comes in, where they say, hey, I actually do find my husband or wife attractive. So it's usually down to those, something in those categories there.
Right. So the first step of path is, right, to get that perspective, to open up that communication. And then the next step is adjustment, right? Here's where we're making some of those adjustments. So the teeter-totter effect really starts to come into play as you're making those adjustments. And then we're getting to the next step, which is tell a new story. And so they're starting to wonder, can I tell a new story here? But what gets in the way of them fully being like, I accept all the changes that you've made. I'm just going to embrace them all and completely let go of my story, right? There's some things that kind of get in the way there.
Absolutely. And so there are almost all, well, no, I wouldn't say there's always, I was about to say almost always, but no, it's pretty much 100%. Always something that's triggering a spouse, some like Heather, you're talking about this story, some belief that they're holding on to, a description about the relationship or about you that is saying, I need to leave the relationship, I need to pull away. And what happens is there are triggers here or there that link into that story, that belief. So maybe it's your spouse believes you are too controlling, and during a maybe if you're separated and you're exchanging the children, and maybe just maybe you mention that you want the kids to be able to have a good weekend. It's like an innocent comment, but your spouse says, oh, here's him saying how I should have to spend time with my children. He's being controlling. And I want you to kind of hear the absurdity of like a connection like that. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is because just about anything can trigger these beliefs, these triggers, and they're all going to link back to like these central beliefs. If we're talking about in mental health terms, especially within like cognitive behavioral therapy sort of principles, these would be like some core or intermediate beliefs, the deeper held, more deeply held thoughts, things that are a little bit have taken some time to form, and that person is really holding on to these beliefs, and they really influence moment-to-moment thoughts, automatic thoughts. But it could be that you're too controlling, they're saying, or that you're too angry or argumentative or unsupportive, and it really, that those triggers can come about from the most innocent comments, innocent actions. Even positive comments or actions might be misinterpreted because of these triggers, because of the story that your spouse is telling themselves.
Right. And so as long as they're holding on to that story, then it gives us as coaches, we can see some of these indications, right? Like we can see the positive signs that they're starting to open up. They're lingering longer, right? They're wanting to be around you more. You're having some great interactions. And then what happens is we also see that they're still holding on to some remnants of their story, which is why it's so crucial that we use kind of a scientific process that we do here as coaches to help you uncover exactly what that story is. In the masterclass I just did last week, and I'm going to do another one here in a couple hours, as a little plug for that. If you want to join the Thriving Marriage Facebook group. Anyway, but it's common for people to identify maybe one or two of the reasons why their spouse is leaving, but there's usually 3 or 4 reasons total. And there's usually 2 or 3 that you just aren't aware of yourself. And so you can often try to guess, my spouse is having an affair because I haven't been listening to her enough, or, I haven't been as intimate with him as I, should have. And so you can kind of guess at a few of them, but unless you uncover every single one of them, that's kind of that little remnant of the story that they're going to hold on to. We just got a comment here in the live, as we're streaming this live in the Thriving Marriage Facebook group, of how long can the teeter-totter effect? Well, bottom line is it's going to continue as long as you're still making those positive, good interactions. But if they're still holding on to a piece of the story, a remnant of the story, then it's going to continue on and on and on until they either go one way or the other. And so that's why it's crucial that we uncover exactly what that is and help to change every element of that story.
I want to add one thing to what you said. I do agree with you, Heather, that it's uncovering all these ideas, but I think also there's a matter of depth that's needed. So like I will often hear clients get stuck on kind of the surface here. They say, oh, well, I know what the trigger is. My spouse says we argue too much. And I'm thinking, well, no, that's not the problem. It's, yes, the arguments are probably the triggers, and there's something deeper. There's a reason why the arguments are significant, and it comes down to like beliefs about self or beliefs about the relationship. So, a complaint of we argue too much might be, triggering this belief, we don't have anything in common, or my husband or my wife doesn't care about me. I'm not important to my spouse. It's these beliefs. What you're aiming for and uncovering these are these kind of absolute statements about the self or the relationship. Like they don't care about me. The relationship is failing. There's nothing to be done. I am not important. And it's these absolute statements that are triggered by these surface level problems.
Let's talk about where the root of this really comes from. So if you could, for a minute, as you're listening to this, try to put yourself in your spouse's shoes, right? That they've built up this story. We call it a story or a narrative, but they built up this belief about us, right? That has happened over months, sometimes even over years. The story, like Mark's given many examples here, but it could be anything from, they just don't understand me. They don't care about my needs. They just want to go and do this, right? I'm less important, or, whatever the story might be. I love you, but I'm not in love with you. All these different things that we hear. And at the core of that, though, is one of those deeper kind of hurts. And so they built up a story about us, right? If we're putting ourselves in our spouse's shoes, that is kind of protecting them in some way from pain, right? A story is always a defense mechanism, and it's something that justifies their reasons for leaving. And so when we get to this place where we're starting to take down some of those walls, we've opened up communication, we're helping them feel safe and comfortable with us again, there's still that kind of internal part of them that their belief is kind of screaming at them, like, ooh, don't let your guard down too much, right? So if you can put yourself in your spouse's shoes and kind of understand what that feels like, what we're asking them to do is let go of something that has helped them to feel safe in some way. Whether it's true or not It doesn't matter. For them, it feels true. And to ask them to let down their guard, to let go of that story that's justifying them leaving. Maybe it's helping them feel less guilty. Maybe it is truly helping them feel like they're protecting themselves from some kind of pain or getting hurt or being unhappy. It's a big monumental task. And so when Mark and I, well, specifically Mark, I'm not going to take the credit for it, honestly, but when he shared with me that we're missing a piece here, we really need to help the spouse let go of this story. It's a big task, and it's a crucial step, and it's one that has to happen in order for them to fully come back. If they come back, but they're still holding on to like 10% of that 10% of the story could grow again into becoming the whole story again. So I'm just encouraging you to put yourself in your spouse's shoes and realize for them what it's like to have to let this go, and that they're still holding on to a lot of fear. They're still holding on to a lot of pain. And when you can have that kind of perspective that that's where it's coming from, that can help you kind of cope with it and also help you understand what needs to be done to help resolve it.
I like what you said a lot, Heather, because I think a lot of being able to let go of that story, helping your spouse to let go of them, is being able to have some acceptance for holding on to that. I think a lot of us have this kind of reaction where like, okay, well, this is an unhealthy thing. We should fight against it. We should, okay, I'm going to challenge them on this idea. No, I'm not trying to hurt you. And really being that confident, challenging, aggressive person against that, it backfires, because exactly what you said, Heather, that they're holding on to these beliefs because it benefits them in some way. Oftentimes it protects them. Do I think that there's room in many cases where you do need to challenge? Yes, with care and support and understanding.
Yeah, these situations, they're honestly, they're tricky to navigate, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. What it means is that you need guidance. I'm going to put a plug here for what we do, but that's why we do what we do, because we can help you navigate through those challenging situations and identify exactly what those triggers are for your spouse, what their beliefs are, and then how we can help them to let them go. We've identified probably about a dozen different kind of tests that our spouse will put us through before they finally let their story go. And so here, what we do in the coaching is we help you kind of prepare for what one might come up, because we know you, we know your spouse. At this point, we've worked together enough to know, how to make things safe and comfortable and how to get them to open up communication, all those things, and then help you kind of pass those tests. The tests are kind of like their final hurrah, like their big final battle. I could get Lord of the Rings here if I wanted to, right? Like they're on Mount Doom, right? And this is their final hurrah. And part of them really wants to let their story go. They really do. But part of them is still really scared. And so they go back and forth. They wobble inside their own minds. Should I come back to him? Should I come back to her? Should I pull away? What if I get hurt again? And so it's like our beliefs are so strong that many of us would die for them, right? And so this is like the final battle to defend the belief, but also part of them really wants you to show them that the changes you've made are permanent, and that how far you've come is how it's really going to be going forward. So it's kind of like a test to see if the changes you've made are going to stick, if you're legit, like if this is real or not. And I'm going to be honest, this part is kind of messy. It's messy. It's going up and down. It's all over the place. And it's easy to think that you're backsliding or that you've lost progress. And that isn't the case. You've actually made a ton of progress, which is why we consider it a huge win. It's like you just need to continue to do the same principles that got you to this point and show them, yeah, these changes are real. This is the real me. You can trust me. You can learn, you can let this go. And as you kind of pass that final test, it's like all the walls are gone, and now they fully believe you, and they believe the new story about you and about the relationship.
Heather, I've noticed that you've been mentioning Lord of the Rings the last few weeks. You're going through like a marathon. I find it funny because my family and I are actually going through a marathon, because my older kids have been resisting watching those movies for forever. They haven't seen them all. And we just got this big projector to watch it. So we have like a good like 120-inch screen now to watch. Anyways, what Heather, not to get up too far off on the tangent, what Heather was saying was absolutely right. Is that there are some really commonly held, say, tests or beliefs, reasons that your spouse might continue to pull away, and absolutely these are difficult to navigate, to identify, and not simply as a plug for us, but yes, there is that plug. You do need some professional help. And I'm just going to say, if you don't go with us, if you, sure, I think we do a good job with it, but if you don't go with us, go with someone. Get someone to talk about this, to help you identify this, because you don't get stuck in these patterns because you know exactly what's going on and you know exactly how to get out. You get stuck in these patterns because it's hard to see things from a bird's eye view, an outside perspective, and it really it's very helpful to get a bit of that objective perspective outside of the relationship.
Right. But just another little side note, a little bit of a warning too. This is rarely talked about. And we didn't even discover it until after working with thousands of students. And so if you go to your neighborhood therapist, they might have, no clue what we're referring to here. So just bear that in mind.
Yeah, I'm going to just point that out. So when I was going to school, I specifically, I didn't have to when I was going to school, but I specifically took classes on couples therapy and whatnot. So, I mean, this is an option for most people who go through school. But I'm going to point out in that one, I specifically took a class on like relationship therapy focused on, cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, meaning like it should have talked a lot about this, because this is where this is coming from, this idea of holding on to beliefs. And it didn't. It at the end of the class I was like, okay, I got it. I can take care of couples now with this specific technique. But I'm realizing now, years later, after years of doing my own work and staying in this this specific problem for quite some time, there was so much more to learn than a one class on cognitive behavioral therapy applied to couples. I can't remember the exact name of the course, but it's like Heather said, it's not typically focused on or talked about.
So let's talk about we can go into our personal, I see the outline here, our personal things here maybe in a minute, but I really want to make sure that we cover how to cope with this situation, and maybe we can use our own experiences to illustrate a little bit, and as well as some of our clients, because how to cope with this when you're the one that's making all these changes, you're the one working to get your spouse back. In fact, we have a comment here. When making the changes and doing the things they say they need, how do you not feel taken advantage of when you continue to do and give, but get very little to nothing back? And this is why this question came up, I believe, is that our clients get to this point, and like I said, it's really messy. It's an emotional roller coaster. You have the huge high, they say they're coming back, or we went on a great date, or we had an awesome conversation, we laughed, I feel like we're friends again, right? That's the indication. Those are the signs that we've reached this stage, this level. We've done great work to get there, okay? So how do we feel like we're not being taken advantage of? How do we maintain the energy that's needed for the final battle? We call it, I'm just going to call it the final battle, okay? The final battle, as we put their story to rest and as we create a new story together about what we want the marriage to really be and how we want our spouse to really see us. Mm-hmm. So, Mark, any suggestions for that?
No, it's a really good question. Because I will see that very same situation when there's this teeter-tottering, of course, as the spouse is pulling away, that can be very damaging. And that's where that question is coming from. Like, as my spouse keeps going back and forth, I continually feel hurt and hurt and over again, as they pull away. And this is where I started, what I was mentioning earlier, like there's certainly is some need or some room here for challenging your spouse, because you to a certain extent you do need to keep some boundaries, make sure that you are taking care of yourself. But it's a very fine rope to walk on, to balance on here, a fine line between that challenge and having some acceptance or understanding about why your spouse is pulling away. Because if you just met their damaging behavior with your own boundary, like, no, you can't do that, we are ignoring the fact that that damaging behavior is coming from a place where your spouse is trying to protect themselves. They're trying to do something good for themselves. And as you put that wall up and you're saying you cannot protect yourself, you can't do, they're going to react. They're not going to feel heard. They're going to feel like their own pain is invalidated. And it won't go well for you if you're trying to save the relationship. And I think this is a situation where each individual couple is going to have a slightly different approach, but it is that line of having acceptance and understanding that what they're doing is not 100% evil or bad. It's coming from a place of hurt, and at the same time making sure that you are confident in standing up for your own emotional needs, your own emotional health. A practical example of this, and this is a very small scale. So, I have here in the notes like a question, like, okay, like what are some triggering moments in our own marriages? Because I have my own triggers, and instantly I thought, okay, it really bothers me when I'm listening to my spouse or my wife. My wife Jen really likes to share and talk with me, and I'm a good listener. That's my job most of the day. And so then when I try to put in my own input into the situation, my wife talks over me. This is a not uncommon occurrence. And at first it really, really bothered me. Like it hurt. I was like, okay, I've been sitting here, I've been listening for some time, and now I'm just trying to get in a few words, and she just kind of rolls over me. And so I would react. We would be having this connecting moment. Hear this teeter-totter. We'd have this connecting moment, and suddenly I'd get very angry, and I'd get cold, or I might raise my voice a little bit. And then I started to recognize what was going on. I was like, I don't feel heard here. And so I the kind of relationship that Jen and I have, I brought this up. I said, Jen, I know you're not trying to do this. I saw the positive intentions that my wife had. I know you're not trying to do this, but you're talking over me. And I'm guessing it's because you're really excited to share this topic with me. And I'm going to point this out because I want to feel heard. I mean, I'm going to admit, this is kind of like a high level, like some, self-understanding, some understanding from my wife. And because of that, we're used to this kind of talk. There was an easy shift there, but I'm now forgetting how I got on this tangent, Heather.
But just, how to cope with it, how to deal with this emotionally when we're going through that teeter-totter effect.
That's right. And so I was talking about this balance, and not to toot my own horn, but like, do you hear that balance where I'm assuming the best intentions from my wife, saying, I bet you're not trying to dismiss what I'm saying. I bet there's some other positive reason here. But so I'm going to assume that first, and I'm going to start with that. But I'm also feeling hurt here, and I'm wanting to share that with you because I'm sure that's not what you're trying to do. And so let's get around that. And do you hear the balance there that makes a situation like that work?
Yeah, that's beautiful. That would be, the ideal. For me and Ben, I would say we spent the majority of our marriage in the less than ideal and the very much less than aware. Teeter-totter effect for us was, I've shared before really openly about my own internal belief about myself was that I didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel worthy. I felt like if I didn't measure up to some level of extreme perfection, that people were going to leave me, including Ben, because I wasn't good enough. And so that would cause me to, to react to different things he would do. And the thing that would trigger me the most is whenever he'd pull away. If I did or said something that bothered him, his instinct is to pull away and to kind of recoup and to withdraw, right? And that freaked me out, because then it was just like evidence to my mind. Oh, here it comes. You're not good enough. He's already, leaving in some way, even if it was just emotional distance. I felt like emotional distance was terrifying to me. And so what I would do is that would cause me to then pull towards him and engage. And we would have, like, I talked about the cycle of tension building up to the point of an explosion, where then I'd force him to engage. At that point, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He couldn't kind of submerge it or not talk about it, because I hated when he wouldn't talk about it. I want to talk about it because that's my processing or whatever, although I did it very unhealthfully for years. And so then he built up the belief about me, I really don't feel safe emotionally with other. And that was really hard to swallow. But when I finally understood where that was coming from, and I could recognize the patterns, the unhealthy interactions, the destructive and hurtful things that I had done that caused him to believe that, it took a while for him to, for me to show him, I recognized the old patterns. First, I healed that internal belief myself. It's a process always, but, working on those internal beliefs myself so that I could feel like I was good enough. And then after I let that internal story go, building the new story with him, I've made mistakes in the past. I really want you to feel safe emotionally. I really want you to feel like you can open up, that you're not going to get hurt. And now we're at the place where that is the story between us. But I remember that teeter-totter effect. And I remember running up against his resistance to me. And I'm trying to say, like, no, I've changed. Like, I promise I've changed. But they don't just believe our words. They believe our actions, right? And so showing him by taking the pressure off, by increasing understanding, truly going through the path method is what helped him to finally lower his guard and change that story. But for those that are going through like how to cope with it, for me, and I would say this to any of our clients, taking that 30,000 foot view of the situation, recognizing that this is part of the process. It's hard, but any journey worth going is, going to be challenging. If you're going to get to the end of it, you're going to have to go through some challenges. And so just recognizing it's part of the process, taking that 30,000 foot view, kind of pulling yourself out of the situation and recognizing, okay, this is where we're at. It's hard. It is. But hopefully you have, coaching and support so that you're like, I'm not alone. I can recognize it for what it is. I can even have some understanding for what my spouse is going through. And as I have that understanding that it's really their fear coming up, it's really their maybe justification, so they don't have to feel guilt or shame, whatever it might be in your case, that gives you some compassion and you realize it's not so much about me. It's more something that they're going through. For me, whenever I realize it's more something that someone else is going through, then it doesn't hurt me as much, right? It still may be hurtful, still may be damaging. You still may need to put in some healthy boundaries, like Mark said, because we don't want to be, walked over or feel like we're constantly taken advantage of. But noting that, it's really something that they're going through. How can I support them in this? And how can we successfully get through this final battle? And with that, knowing that there's times in a marriage restoration process where you do have to give more. And it's not fair. It's not about being fair. It just isn't, right, Mark?
No, it's not.
No, it's not. And so there's a point where you're going to have to give more. And so you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself. We teach all of our clients a morning formula, kind of a morning ritual that really helps to fill you up so that you can feel strong and ready for battle, right? There's that saying that he who sweats more in training bleeds less in war. And so you kind of have to put in that sweat so you're ready for war. And with all that being said, knowing that eventually at some point, if you stay true to the process and you continue forward with all the things we talked about, with the compassion, with the understanding, and with the perspective, that eventually the relationship will be brought into balance. This is something I've learned from Mark. Eventually the relationship will be brought into balance. And then you can feel like you're getting your needs met. You don't have to be the one constantly giving. If you're in this stage, you're not there yet. Okay. And I know that's hard, and it is. So make sure you're doing those things to take care of yourself in the process, and have the perspective knowing that eventually it will be brought into balance, and you'll have the kind of relationship that feels not fair, because I don't ever want to say fair, but it feels just more balanced.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing some of the comments here, and it still seems like there's just some questions about it. And I know just from experience, we're talking about trying to get down deep, trying to understand your spouse quite a bit more. And I think it begs the question, well, what if your spouse won't talk about this? What if they won't go deeper? What if you can't provide that understanding because you don't know? I feel like this is, once again, to further emphasize what this is about. They're probably doing that because there are some triggers surrounding those kind of conversations, and they are backing off because they don't feel safe, and they're using this. They're avoiding these discussions as a way to protect themselves, much like we were discussing before. So either what this means is either what they have to say, they feel like it won't be heard, or that it might be argued against and become invalidated, or they might fear that you might actively resist it. And so, essentially what I'm getting at here is there are going to be some obstacles here. And this isn't, none of the things that Heather and I discuss are straightforward things. It's not just about, having that balance like I talked about, or it's not just about identifying the story or the beliefs that they're holding on to. Lots and lots of different factors, which is why getting some support on something like this is really important. Because, if your spouse is really doing that stonewalling sort of behavior, and they're really shutting down, that's really going to prevent progress at all in solving these problems. And you need some help identifying why are they stonewalling, and how might you get around some of those defenses to get to this thing here. Yeah.
So just one more thought before we go on to our marriage mythbuster here is just the challenge of completion, right? Not only do we start strong, but we want to finish strong. And when you're in this kind of a journey, it can feel very strenuous, and it can take a toll on you, especially at this point. You've been working for weeks, sometimes months, to get to this place where now your spouse is having connection with you. They're attracted to you again. You're having some really positive experiences together, and it feels amazing. And you feel like, okay, we're doing it. We're there. And then you realize you're only 3/4 of the way up the mountain, and you've got this final push to go. And then your spouse, they come full force at you with their story, and it hurts and it's ugly. And they bring out, our spouses are good, right? They know our triggers and they are going to use most likely every single one of them before they finally lay their story to rest. And so at this point, it just reminds me of when I was in my battle with cancer, and I had gone through chemotherapy when I was pregnant. I had had surgery. The baby was born. In fact, she's actually snuck into the room. She's sitting over here, Kiri. And then 6 days after that, I had to go back for surgery. 6 weeks after that, I had to resume really intense chemotherapy for 4 months, and going every single week. And the last 2 weeks was literally hell. And I am not a quitter. I'm a fighter. And the whole time I was like, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight. And about a month before chemotherapy was done, I was like, I don't think I can finish this. This is too much. I really don't think. 2 weeks before I was done, I had 2 weeks left. I had 2 treatments to go. And I was completely done. I had nothing left. And the idea of going and taking even one more dose of chemotherapy was beyond what I could handle. physically, I was shot. Mentally, I was completely forgetful of things. I had fog and not able to comprehend things like I used to, and gave me a huge compassion for what it's like to have mental handicaps, because that's truly where I was at. I was not able to take care of my kids, completely numb emotionally, completely numb spiritually, and just everything was just, I was just done. And at that point, that's when I needed to rely on other people, because I couldn't do it myself. And so having that support is crucial, knowing that someone's got your back, and then trusting, for me, in God and a higher power, right, that had led me to this path, and also trusting in those that he led in my path, which was my oncologist, that I needed to finish this. And having that kind of support and trusting their perspective gave me the strength to keep going. And so that's why it's so important to have that perspective from someone else, because sometimes you're like, I don't feel like I can keep doing this. I feel like I'm constantly being taken advantage of. My heart hurts. My heart is raw, right? And this struggle that I've been going on, I don't feel like I can keep going. And so that's when having that perspective of just do a little more, just keep going a little further. It's going to be okay. It's going to work out. You just need to keep going, was what I needed at that time. And so if that helps you, I know that's oftentimes where a lot of clients get at this point. And that's when we, as your coaches, we give you that perspective. Just keep going a little bit more. I know it's hard, but you can do it. And sometimes we just need that in life. We just need that final push to help us get through those times. So encourage you there. If that resonates with you, if you feel like, yeah, I need that perspective to uncover what their story is, like, what are those 2 or 3 things that I don't know about that I need to uncover, and then help fully change that story, get through that final battle so I can come out, victorious on the other end.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, let's go to our marriage mythbuster, which actually ties in really well. It's so funny because when I pick these marriage mythbusters, they're not really in conjunction with the topic. I kind of get them from different, things that we hear. Mark comes up with some too, things we hear from clients and our audience and just in the culture, right? But it actually ties in really well. So our marriage mythbuster today is that we keep failing and failing, right? So it's probably better if we just give up and move on. I hear this question a lot on social media, on our posts, different things like that. Isn't there just a point where you should just call it quits? Is there a point where you should just call it quits? So Mark, what's your take on this one?
So I find the question interesting because it's kind of a sense of, do I keep going or do I give up? And the idea is that there are 2 choices here, which is, what I would classify as a cognitive distortion, an error in thinking. And there's a common list of cognitive distortions and the reason why they're called that is because they generally lead to problems, to more pain. And I'm calling it that because there's almost always more than 2 options here, and not just push through all the pain and misery or give up completely. Now, I will admit, there are probably points where you should give up. Yeah, but it's probably not to the extent that you might think here. It's like, I actually think that it's 100% the right choice to, for instance, call it quits if there is some extreme, some really deep abuse going on, especially physical or sexual abuse. You might ask, well, what about, say, emotional or verbal abuse? And I feel like those things, while very damaging, and you do want to consider that, it may be a consideration to give up at that point, but those things are typically a little bit more misunderstood and easier. More people are quicker to label things as emotional or verbal abuse when it's not really that, and can be worked around a little bit easier. But anyways, abuse is certainly a situation where I say, that you may need to really consider giving up. Or if you absolutely have 0 communication with your spouse, or perhaps if they're making very serious plans to be with someone else, like they're planning to have children, or they have, they're starting to tie their finances together, or, they're starting to really, build a life together. And even some of these situations are not 100%, yeah, I absolutely give up. But here's the thing. I mentioned it's not just two choices. And I recognize that there are some times when it seems really hard to you, and you, rather than calling it quits, maybe you need to pull back, take a break, and focus on yourself a little bit, which is not the same as calling it quits. In many cases, it may be that you're both uninterested in the marriage because you've been pushed far enough. They've been telling you that they're uninterested. Neither one of you wants to work on it, and then even then, calling it quits may not be 100% appropriate, and maybe you just need to, like I said, focus on yourself for a time. So the question that I like to ask when clients ask me, should I just give up? And obviously then I say, well, maybe, do we want to go for a break? But the questions I ask, does this feel healthy to me to keep going? Like, am I feeling like mentally strong enough to push past this? If it starts to feel like you're dragging, or like it feels like you're damaging yourself, okay, that's maybe a time when you need to consider a break. Or do I have room to feel like I can have respect for myself? I deal with clients where their spouse might be very emotionally or verbally unkind, but then want to have that physical intimacy, and they say to themselves, okay, I'm going to make this connection. I'm going to push past this, and it just feels. They tell me, I feel like I'm losing respect for myself. Well, if you're saying yes, then maybe it's time that you need to step back, reevaluate, focus on your own needs, maybe set some boundaries. If you can't honestly say that this feels healthy, I feel strong and confident, or if you can't say that I have respect for myself when I'm engaging with my spouse, then you might need to back off and work towards your own happiness for a time. And this is going to mean many different things to different situations and different people. The real question, though, to ask yourself is, if I quit now, what are the consequences going to be? If I pushed it a little bit further, if I pushed it a little bit longer, what could I hope to get here? I think both of those questions are also very important to consider. Do you want to live with the consequence of saying, I did not give it my all. I didn't. I could have pushed it a little bit further, and I decided not to. And that's a very personal question, because I will admit there are some times when, like I said, it is appropriate, and you may not need to push it a little bit further. When I have clients who ask me these sort of questions, I personally want to make sure that I'm taking into consideration, what they are going through emotionally, and I want to take that question very seriously, because sometimes it is the case where you need to give up. Sometimes you just need to take a break. Sometimes you need to be confident and keep going. I do think that in these sort of cases, a lot of people are looking for an escape to get away from a lot of the pain, the difficulty that they're seeing. And so I understand where you're coming from. For some reason, I have kids knocking on my door. We're going to finish up in just a few minutes. But, I understand why you're asking this. You don't want to hurt anymore. And I will also say, though, that a lot of times this pain is a catalyst for growth. Heather, you talk about this all the time. You reference a lot of the challenges that you've had, and I think you would agree that a lot of the challenges that you've gone through have made you stronger because you stuck it out.
Right.
So, if you can say, hey, I can keep going forward, I have a little bit of strength left, you want to ask yourself, can I move forward and be at peace with this? Can I still feel love towards my spouse? And can I look back on this and say that I have no regrets in terms of how I handled this? I can't tell you give up or not, or take a break, because these are a lot of these questions need to be considered here.
Right.
Yeah.
With that being said, also addressing the idea that failure, right? We're just failing. I just feel like I'm failing. All my efforts are failing. I'm just trying, which really goes into the teeter-totter effect, right? How you often perceive failure. And just kind of taking the shame away from failure and knowing that failure is actually the process of anything that we're going to become good at. We're going to fail numerous times, and it's actually okay to fail. That doesn't mean that it's the end, and it doesn't even necessarily mean that it's actual failure, right? It could just be 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and that's how we're going to get up the mountainside, but eventually we will get up the mountainside. I like this quote, success, has been said, isn't the absence of failure, but going from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm. Loss of enthusiasm, yeah, you might have a little bit of loss of enthusiasm, but you're going to continue forward anyway because your vision is stronger than the obstacles that you're facing. I really love the example of Thomas Edison. He tried over 1,000 times to create the light bulb, the incandescent light bulb, whatever. And he was interviewed, and they asked him, what did it feel like to fail 1,000 times? And he said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps. And I really love that. And so, basically knowing that just because things are hard right now, or it feels like we're going backwards, that's okay. That's part of the process. And unless you're in such a really unhealthy situation that it's important for you to call it quits, I would encourage you that, the more you can take a look at your situation and decide who you really want to be and where you want your life to be, that you can learn so much by continuing forward, rather than to escape from pain or give in to the idea that you're failing, because you're not. You're just simply learning and growing and improving. And I love the idea of fail your way to success, right? That's really what it is. It's really about that. It's not about perfection. It's about continuing forward, even when we fall down, picking ourselves back up and keep going anyway, because where we want to go is more important than where we've been and more important than the challenges that we're facing. So with that being said, I encourage you guys, if you're needing more help with this, to book a complimentary consultation with us over at highthrivecoaching.com/apply. And we will guide you through this process and help you to get to that end destination where you really, truly want to be. Our lives are short, time is precious. And so I encourage everyone to decide really where they want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, 60 years from now. All right. With that being said, next week, I'm going to come on here personally. Mark's going to take a bit of a break. He's been working really, really hard. So I'm going to come on here with how to save your marriage without getting your heart hurt, and our 4 unconventional steps. Yes, it's our path method, but in a little bit of a new way, because we've learned some new things and I'm excited to share them with you. It's really going to help make some profound differences as you apply them to your marriage and your life. Thank you so much, Mark. We appreciate having you here. And thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you guys next podcast.
See you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.